三界道错觉错难，叫做前，他就去见这个。大家到嘎的嘎的，大家到嘎的嘎的，大家到嘎的嘎的，巴拉。我老说，那什么叫他们这个东西？他家那嘛，就把三界恐怕人不是今年叫拖差。俺第一期的那讲究什么？老讲的，俺把最新的那么说，让过来，让完了，先过来，先把它退过来，退完了，俺告诉说嘛，那话就过去，俺告诉爸爸的，俺就是全部修完了，这边俺就个简单，这些全部那个人生产钱，我的钱。
So we begin by setting our motivation as we normally do. A motivation to really work towards the state of enlightenment, to attain the state of enlightenment, do our very best to attain that state of enlightenment by perfecting all the trainings on the Bodhisattva path. To perfect those trainings, of course, we need to study them. To study them, we need to have a non-mistaken source from which we are able to gain our knowledge. And so it is with this in mind that we are here to listen to teaching from the Bodhisattva's way of life that's composed by the great master Shantideva.
我老说我的想，我大概在南京的县前呢，大概在这个上个东跟南看了，我那个听见在那么人巴了，那么他就推荐全部东巴现在东巴去，按赛道，按东巴，他就告诉的，他们在这个。过了出门我们都叫说谢谢前年也3年1年下来但就这个路在那么去我送过来的有上山去那让给他我对让了进去了嘛给个身边他这点旁边呢这边主要这个身边他在大概马上我们我有上我的恐怕去
So as normal also we begin by setting up the figure of the merit field in front of us and in reality our own guru in aspect, the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha, who is skilled in means, greatly compassionate, who is has one face and 2 hands. His right hand is in the earth-touching mudra, the left hand in the meditative equipoise mudra, holding an alms bowl filled with nectar. He is surrounded, as we are, by all kind mother sentient beings of all the 6 realms of existence, without exception.
真的是，俺那点呢，这个让个对那赛代表，俺都把下家都把地，俺那个时候就往天把土个红一个送赛道，俺土个红嘞，原先8都买不出来，俺现在的那边一些把往那的就把建厂呢，俺一些把都光把的出来，俺个时候的他就那么土边我们那把建厂的听，俺往来往过去那么就是那边嘞，没有物件那个其他，我得有生产去。
And the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha is marked by the 3 syllables at the crown, at the throat, and hung at the heart. From the hung at the heart, light rays emanate going out into the pure realms, inviting all of the wisdom beings and empowering deities from their natural abodes there. They come, the initiating deities dissolve into the central figure. The empowering deities confer the nectar of empowerment, some of which overflows at the crown, and spontaneously producing the figure of Akshobhya on the crown of Shakyamuni Buddha. 我的赛道，我的他让你对那书边呢，那么图边我的一希望我是书呢，但我的书呢有上山的书呢有上山去了，我大概 So to can remind ourselves too that as much as we possibly can to get the idea that the figure that we're visualizing is actually there in person, in reality, and that the having been empowered by the wisdom being and so on, and that the Buddha is there and is the embodiment of all the Buddhas of the three times.
What is compassion? That in the chain, that Kaja Kasole, that Kanja, Bebegi, and the chicken, Kosote, and to also to go in dedicated Chambachene, Achiba Tamja Jawa, Shenchiba, Tala Jawa, Kula to Jichuba, Yetinobachuba, Penta Mata, Tamja Chicken, and it about there, Marazo Nashenchene, and the chicken, Lenu with Shaman Chenchi. And I got to she wants change, and I want to give she the change. And it's a good matter, and good data chin, and Nian John Johnson, young type of tower to Namsulan, and it got the Marazu to the two get, Marazu to the such a lama, Timmy, Turner, and Soju Coma top image. What did they say? What did they say?
So when we are considering the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha, that we are recalling also the enlightened qualities of a Buddha's body, mind, and speech. And likewise, how an enlightened being has no fear of any suffering in relation to themselves, is skilled in means in removing the fear of others of their suffering, works for the benefit of all with great compassion, with a mind without any single bias, and also works to benefit regardless of whether there is any benefit to come in return. So it's completely pure motivation. And that we also can consider when looking at the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha, that at one point he was just like us, under the influence of karma and the mental afflictions, completely under that power, and met with a qualified spiritual teacher, received instruction, started to contemplate on issues like renunciation, the mind of enlightenment, and the correct view of emptiness, and so became more and more familiar with these thoughts until they became realizations in his own mind, and that then attained that state of enlightenment, kind of entered the path, kind of practiced on the path, fulfilled the path for at all points, for our sake, for the benefit of all sentient beings, that includes us. And so we have to kind of bear that in mind as well.
The was a and Randa Tombani, sometimes never check door. Tangarazo, Mombe only got through your Marima, the Munajana, Simja Tamjeta, and Chicaso, Javashu Chumbo, you had to get Tobayo Marma, Casana, Tombate, Tambutangarazo, the Chiba Lenu, Shawan Chenchi, and then a Guji Dado Chinjan, and Narazo to the two get, Narazo to the Lamla, Narazo to the Wombasoba Sanke. What are the legend? Narazo that Petawas, Tomama, you eating it. Got a Sanjay child, Tabu got to the net or you take a chat. What are the legend you do? What did you want to run you more church and the digital one at an edge? Don't but I knew she was chatting.
So as part of this kind of contemplation, we should conclude also that we are kind of incredibly close with the Buddha, and that because the Buddha started out exactly in the same situation as us, under the influence of karma, under the influence of mental afflictions, and so it's kind of like had that similar motivation that we have, then for the benefit of all sentient beings, kind of worked the path, kind of like really entered onto the path, developed the mind of enlightenment, trained on the path, practiced the path, and then finally reached full and complete enlightenment. But it's for us that he did all this for our sake, for the benefit of all sentient beings, including us. And so therefore he has that, as we have, when we have that motivation, trying to working for the benefit of all sentient beings, it creates a connection. And particularly when we have that in common with an enlightened being like the Buddha, that we have a very close sense of connection there, in that we're all aiming for the same thing, the benefit of all sentient beings.
What did it say? 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 And it didn't have Jigga sort of Simjenge and it do Taiba Magan Simja Tanja and the Jigga Gasoda, Quachi the Jedaga doing your suit Kumbasha and it did and Gasoda Gasotunga now Missube Ninja. And it did to me the Jenny, Dawada Tedu Jamaica. And it didn't 동네들 대화들 temate and 다기 지금 있었다 소수 지가 저도 심재 탐재시는 심재 지기야 대화 탐재 때 동네 탐재도 저와지 다 제마도 받다 라투고 뭐 여기 이제 쓰러 다 근데 이번에도 다 근데 제투에 누가도 술을 두시도 오다 근데 누가도 심재도 투게 람라 뭐가 저거 산재긴 근데 다 가지고 가서도 다 미버 정시가 투 콘을 라는 견해시가 또막 콘을 다들 이번에서 콩고 공부하지 도바이나 뒤제 감다 매와 삼바 바라니와 치다와시도 kingu yoba yinsa ane chije tamje kai jeba yiba yine semje ga dona ma juba midu dende yiba za khong ko ma ma dona tamdo ane toba chigi samsa ko ta de lo chike.
So we understand the state of sentient beings in cyclic existence, the suffering round in cyclic existence that all sentient beings have to go through. We develop this sense of not being able to bear that they go through such suffering, and so thereby generate this sense of compassion. And the desire that they should all have happiness, and the causes of happiness is developing that kind of confectionate love. And so we really want to kind of, how wonderful it would be to aspire to that all sentient beings are on one hand free of all that suffering and the causes of suffering were endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May that be the case. I myself will see to it that it is the case. And we develop this sense of special intention to go and do it for ourselves. But when we contemplate on that, it becomes quite obvious that we can't even do this for one other sentient being. It's extremely difficult. And so when we actually analyze to see, from what state of mind is it possible to really work efficiently for all sentient beings, and we can see that it is from the state of a Buddha, the state of Buddhahood, because the Buddha has worked from the very beginning with generating that mind of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, then trained on the path with that motivation, and finally completed the path by attaining full and complete enlightenment. The Buddha understands the individual personalities, dispositions, karmas, and so on, the timing, etc., of all that's necessary to be able to work for sentient beings. And so it's very clear then to me that if I'm serious about my intention to benefit all sentient beings, I must attain that state of enlightenment.
What did the Kumbasha? What does Sanjay Kumamatona? Tomato, that is Toba chicken is not this Tobaina, Raja Niga don't touch much Yogutu. What are the Matuba Tomato? So what did the Uncombasha? And it Tobala, I guess the same Sambuki was with Pingu Yomani, guessing a Chobala Labu, Chobala Labu, and Joba Debe Shung. Rata Shung and a Castle, I guess it's a Mushiwala Seven and a Junju. Tita Gaza Geshe Joba Debe Shung gave it our chat and the Shung to some chicken is what is said.
And so it's saying that, really, if I don't gain that state of enlightenment, then it's really going to be very compromised, my ability to benefit others. So it's really, if I have a sincere aspiration to benefit all, I must attain, there is no choice about it, I must attain that state of enlightenment. And that is the process by which I can fulfill the purpose of myself and others. And so it's about, really turning my aspirations into actions, into transforming my behavior. And I have this opportunity with this particular text. It's like a manual for being able to perfect one's behavior in this sense, with that motivation, the Bodhisattva's way of life. And so it is with this motivation that I'm here to listen and try to understand some of what is said in this text.
So I don't know what that do not about commission. What I say to check what in the check.
Soktrang Gupke.
Gopjet.
Yeah, Dunla, the Somba. Tena, Nyongmong Sombe Jowala Zombala.
Ola so. Ya. Re ta kanje ngaranto sem sangbo kege yode sem sangbo kene ane chobala labele kege chigen so de ta rwa ta kaza de nyomong chige yorwa nyomong chige yode ta kaza nyomong ta kaza ngotwe ne ane meba so ta jama jiba ina ane ko sem sangbo kege wa zamre mendo ane tene ya yage rawa dotu marwa yage joyala kari nuso nyomong nwe dege tuwa o dere ta tene inza desa sumba dena sa nyomong shom ta nyomong shom be asa jowala zombar rikwa nesa ta rikwa la niche nyomong be nyemi la nyomong be nyemi la kaso ta nyomong be asa nyomong be nyemi la beabar jawa tang ta nyemi digate ta ngotwe ba jene ta di shel bechun cheche beabar tang ane du namya nyomong be ondo me joba ta di kyo dige toa ina o ta an dele shabat tingna la na ta chik du da nega condition ba na nyomong be ondo me joba la ane bechun chebo des chao xia
Tambodi kan ko Nyongmong be niempo la pe la cha. No tira?
ane nyomong shomba jowa zoba la
Yeah, needy and Tambodi
nyomong be asa
Nyongmong be niempo la.
nyembo la beabar jawa o de de
Yeah. So
nyomong be nyembo la beabar jawa ta tangbo nyomong ba de kyen jigo yena andi nyembo de kadis tengo res jiwa
la.
nyembo la beabar jawa nyomong be nyembo la ane nyembo de ngotwe ba jena de la bezu jene ane kazu nyomong kema chuwa sogo res ruwa ta nyembo tene ane du namya ta nyena dwana sana tuna kadu inba ina ruwa ta du namya ane nyomong be ondo mandowa nyomong be shawando mandowa ta kanja nyomong yongda gane yongu to yaku kosuye keche murwa di mo koma so na ha mogowe ongu yongde kido ngarazu mancha ha mogowe ongu yongde ane kecha du ngotugu yomarwa beabar jawa sa
And so that this point in the text is really focusing on dealing with what are known as the mental afflictions, and that regardless of how good a mind we may think we have, that we still are kind of very much under the control of these negative states of mind, the mental afflictions, and indeed they are one of the great obstacles to any improvement in our life, in our situation. And so it's very, very important that we become to recognize these mental afflictions and then very assiduously work to eradicating them. And so otherwise we won't see any improvement. And so here we're looking at the outline, which is saying that the kind of a reasoning behind the really putting the effort into the actual action of overcoming or of eradicating or destroying your afflictive emotions. And this has two subheadings. The first is really making an effort at applying the antidotes to the mental afflictions. And this is kind of like knowing, first of all, that the fault of mental afflictions, the fault within your mind system, and then knowing the antidote to apply to overcome that mental affliction. And the second is that we would never allowing ourselves to fall under the control of mental afflictions. And this is pointing to the fact that, that for our sake, in kind of a beginner sense, we are almost not even aware of how mental afflictions arise in our minds. And so often we don't even see them coming. And so it's kind of really, this is at a point where saying, you're drawing a line in the sand by saying at no time is it appropriate for me to fall under the influence of mental affliction. And so with regard to the first is really making an effort to apply the antidotes to mental affliction. We pick up the text at the second half of verse 42. The second two lines say, "But as this is so, I must never withdraw from vanquishing my disturbing conceptions. And to do this will be my sole obsession. Holding a strong grudge, I shall meet them in battle. But disturbing conceptions such as these destroy disturbing conceptions, and for the time being are not to be abandoned."
Sabata. And Joa to let get a share that Joanna that Dona that Joa can this you when Sadon can this you when there. And Tita Chilmidova Taka Dendeg Caso Nomon Chomegi Lotile Matova Chene. Dendeg and Chile Matova Chene. Matova Chawa Tasta could do in a Chezega Nomon Shukchabo Chunga Chunga never saw a tablet dredge. Sana, Tuna, Turna, Takari in there. Because of the Cholam Nashi condition by in there. And what the Kaja because of the Jodu Choba condition by in there. And because of the Tami Zoti, Nomu Shukchabuyana, Shukchun the Tai, Chua the Mavasoya, Taka Nomu Shoba Chich, what did tell Baba Chigudes, Baba Chigudes. That Nomongi Nebu Nyabutela Dagi is Shamber Jashinson, that Nomongi Nyabuti, and also Ketchamucha, that the Chaksu, that Shen, the Ketchamutin, Shenja Chen, Jeshin, Nyamula Kondo sooner, you detest that because the digger Nomo Bala Casa de Takajaje, the Kondo sooner, Tati, so the diet Damazina, Kondo sooner, that you just and the march of a social Tati, Coca Cola Martavacha, Shomach Chawers, Chakudes.
So these lines saying that due to this reasoning, then I must constantly engage in reflection on, and then following that up with action to overcome the mental affliction. So in terms of reflection on, it means that we must be aware, and this brings in those mental factors of mindfulness and alertness, in order to really keep kind of ourselves focused on whatever we are doing, that we are constantly aware of, the fault of mental affliction, how mental afflictions might arise, and then being able to apply, mindfulness and alertness and bringing it to our attention, and then taking action to overcome those mental afflictions. So it's kind of like the vow that we make, never to renege on this purpose, this job that we have done. Whatever I do, whatever path of action I take, my main objective will always be to either reduce the influence and the occurrence of mental afflictions, and ultimately to eradicate them altogether. And so I will never kind of turn back from that. I'll never kind of like withdraw from that action. So it's kind of saying, really, then I have to become obsessed with being able to become aware of and apply the antidotes to the mental afflictions. And as if I held a grudge against those mental afflictions and enter into battle, as if I was going to, overcome an enemy. So I have to take this kind of quite strong, aggressive approach.
But dinner she chenata, dinner she chenata, Nomo de that dinner to Gachata. Dada, chicken never so chicaso de nega never yon take, Nomola than a yon taker. Nomo man did nobody yomata. Yoba chichon condition by in there. Mama to send Nomola to te that Nomo de Mavasona, Kanga Mava Chatu, that tea, and Mortune, Dinner Shabalone, some dinner Kadu in there, that Nomo de die Tamasushana. Dai Damas Zine, and it goes with that the Kuka Metawachich, Kuka Metawachigores, and Dilet Kundusuna, Renjang, Pangnela, Changtan Janasa, Rota Casada, Nomo Nyambola, Chaba, and it Nomo Corala, Tawachene, that hope the dinner, Nomo Dawsers Duati, to Changtan sort of Chigitoa. In a D, Changtan D, and it Gasodata, Nomo Chagio Maris. Number 10, Nomone, Nomo Jomje University, the day Nomo Jomje Chago Automatic, Nomonaba Maris, and take Panchal Matos, the Pangoya Maris, the Lalenta Queres. Tata Chagtanti, Lalenga Kawachagiosna, Nomongi Nebula Chaba, Chaks the Tilatangole, Tikachimozine. Tawas the Nomon Corona, Tawachen, that is what Tawaches at Chapaches at Manoares. Because tea dunga, tengu yomar, tea dunga mevasogo yores. Tea nomo tengu yomar, tea nomo mevasogo das, tea and tea panja maris, tea nomo chomje remando, tea panja maris, tea that tea tango lands, chomje in the panja matos shabocha.
So, say, in a worldly sense, we may have issue, say, with a neighbor who has done us some grave wrong, and because of that, it's always in our mind, isn't it? We're constantly turning that over in our mind, and maybe looking for revenge, looking for a way to get back. And so it's kind of like you kind of try to dig into that sort of experience, but this time you're turning that emotion on your own mental affliction. So it's kind of like this, saying mental affliction is much worse than anything my neighbor could do. That's only a temporary thing. They were under the influence of mental affliction when they did it. Here, this is something that never kind of gives me a break. It's always causing me suffering. So you kind of develop this sense of something that must be destroyed, something that must be eradicated. And the requisite kind of emotion that might be able to do this, a real strong aversion towards these mental afflictions. Say, I'm never going to give you an opportunity to do all the suffering, all the damage you did to me for so long. I have this grudge towards you for all of that. And I'm going to kind of really, really destroy you, mental affliction. And so it's kind of saying here, when it talks about this kind of language, this kind of aggressive language, saying, isn't this kind of steering into the area of that which should be abandoned and so on, and attachment and aversion and so on. But the argument here is that here I'm using this as a means to an end. It's a tool to actually destroy mental affliction, destroy that which causes suffering, whereas the attitude with which I'm doing it isn't causing suffering. It is actually eradicating suffering because it's designed to eradicate the mental affliction. And so in this way, it is a correct means to an end. And so that's why it's not to be abandoned at this point.
Nyomu jobjeje, nyomu date, nyomu gyuden kansate dalma deva chete, nyomu gyuden kansate nyedote, ta nyomu date to nyomu gyuden kansate date na ta norsare, ruwa norsare, nyomu kyondo tene nyomu debe kansare ninjike kubuyare, ruwa tenza tube nyomu daseke, kasa tube nyomu daseke, ane nyomu debe kansa means. Tuba sanje chomde dege nyomo la tatagi yores. Ine nyomo dembe kansa la tatagi yomares. Tatagi yomar. Nyomo dembe kansa la ninjiki yore. Ninji tagi yore. Ene di gule yube nyomo de tatagi yore. Tata ne di nyomo di Geshe ne pangye ke tap tengi tuwa. Tengi tuwa. Tata dida du nyamdo 아니 녀모데 되게 간사라 닝제 진짜 녀모들의 껴때에 녀모들 줄에 때문에 간사라 닝제 온게 땡겨 열봐 딱 그래서 되게 코로나에 누구도 셴에 누구도 근데 이마 인사 기타 잘 소리 샤스는 아니 딜 껴때네 딜라 다 두배 막아 쓰고다 껴주 제네 디배 방에게 탑대 땡겨도와 땡겨도와 대해서 두배 녀모 다스가 두배 상게 좀 되고 녀모 다스가 요래 이내야 녀모 대배 간사라 다스가 요말 담아스네 될 닝지가 유다가 요랬어 보다 대치관에 단다 대치관에 가서 단다 대가서래 녀모다 되게 될라 답변에 창당스러워다 녀모가 녀모들라 착 녀모 코라나 담아체 디 먼저 남주 영자게 창당되고 저배 말이 디 녀모 끼고 요 말이 녀모 매버 쏘고 요래 녀모 매버 쏘고 요래 녀모 내투고 요 말이 로아 다디 임바제 디 라냥 갖고 임바인 상고들 녀모 좀제 이베 방잘 마도 쏘고 셔보자
So here it's a really case of maintaining the precise focus. And here it's the focus of our aversion is the mental affliction. The focus of our attachment is on the antidote that overcomes mental affliction. So this can't be kind of categorized as your normal attachment and aversion. So it's also the key issue here is that when you are dealing with mental affliction, that you are focused on the mental affliction, not on the person with the mental affliction. That person must be distinguished and maintained as friend, as somebody for whom we have compassion. And it's no more than the Buddha himself has said when he talked about the Buddha regards the mental affliction as the enemy, not the person who has the mental affliction. They are not the enemy. And so it's kind of really important that kind of we understand that it's mental affliction for the one who is kind of like controlled by that mental affliction. It harms them and it harms others. And so they are that is the object of our criticism, not the person themselves. This is very, very important. And that when we employ that kind of obsession with the application of the antidote and the aversion that we employ for the purpose of overcoming mental affliction, they are not to be judged in the normal sense of attachment and aversion.
다들 이번에서 말아도 다 간제 저기 가서를 다 간제 저기 남주 배주 마다나 아니 지금 너무 되게 아니 딜라 때네 아니 너무 규den기 간사라야 아니 가서를 다 간제 저기 지금 마가와 지에다 균주 지에다 다들 지금 말아도 내당 걸로 연구도 가서 말아도 가서를 다 몽배 온게 머리 배 온게 뭐 여기 내수 마신 배 온게 아니 너무 국가 근해내 랭게도와 너무 국가 근해 랭게 다들 이마다 강사다 강사 줘봐니디 야와체네 아니 강사를 닝제체 아니 줘봐 마틱바딜라 아니 거 지가소데 아니 지가소 매버서다 그래 아니 티체온도 아니 거 닝제가 온게 인도 아니 거 뭐유게 내주도 신기도와 디면은 거 착당게 사도 아니 뭐유게 내주 신기 말해 뭐유게 내주 마셔 봐이나 아니 너무 매버 가서 동에 매버 소주 잡라 동에 망다 줘야 유튜브 되지 다들 어제 잡으니까 다들 내가 망쳐다 다가랑 갈 줘되게 열봐 다가랑 갈 지단 용자 매버 소고 요새 무트 용자 용해 다 대사 말에 사람의 사람 봐도 용자 용해 보다 되게 가서도 유튜브에 저도 가서 꼭 뭔가 말이 배운 거 마신 배운 뭐 이거 내서 마신 배운 아니 문에게 다 가리에 문에게 녀 가리에 무엇인 거요 말에 아니 다니 뭐 맞죠 온게 아니 다 간자 저기 가서도 온게 아니 모두는 동에 용대지 유튜브 저되게 열어 어떻게 다 간자 숑처뭐 되돌아 되는 뭐 쳐봐자 뭐 쳐봐 토네 아니 랑이 강토도게 아니 냠랭 갈 자투에 딱 개지 버려도
If we don't employ our intelligence in this way, we will kind of like not recognize the fault of the mental affliction that is arising in a situation like this, and then the dislike of the other, the hatred of the other, the criticism of the other is so easy to arise, isn't it? It happens, doesn't it? As beginners, especially, it's kind of like we lose track of it, and then we find these words spilling out of our mouths, and this is all due to ignorance. The ignorance of not really understanding reality, of not differentiating between the person and their mental affliction. And so it's very, very important that our first response in all interactions should be a response of compassion. We should act out of compassion, knowing that if we allow attachment and aversion to kind of write the program, then that is going to blind us and only create more and more suffering. And so it's kind of like really have to understand that this is all too prevalent in the world. It's like the modus operandi of the world, where people acting, governments acting, organizations acting out of ignorance and creating more and more suffering. And so it's kind of very important that we see who the real enemy is and who the real friend is, and to we can't be unaware. That means we are we kind of have to train ourselves always to be aware of making that distinction between the person who is friend, between their mental affliction as the enemy. And so once we recognize this, then we bring our best practice to bear in each occasion.
내가 뇌계가 연하래 팬토고 연하 가리 임바는 소수 삼로 당초고 돈에 팬토에다 뇌계 저거 좋았다 이거 좋았대도 또 혹시 코가 겐디 지금 요바서 귀소면 바이서 다 너무 되게 아니 삼로 근데 땅아 얘네 거 너무 그 뇌샤면도 가야면 도 삼로고 돈에 너무 되게 마녀바 차줘야지 개면도 다 너무 깨 삼로 돈에 너무 깨 맞고 써요 너무 깨 차린데 아니 개교디 아니 그 가서 년도 전에 팬토야 소야다 되게 삼로 가서다 다 간자 저거 가서다 삼로 가서다 다 간자 저거 가서다 저거 포지티브를 당전에 녀모되게 팬토도 해서 개면도 다 녀모데 깨차도 건명한 거죠 다랑 신기 내도 샤바테데 이마이나 야그 녀마데 그 포지티브다 네거티브 삼로 당당 거 돈에 그 샘키마키다 안주 강에 처마트 주고도 봐. 다 녀모도 거 데레 가요 말. 그 녀모 그 뇌에 권하면서 매드게 지도 봐. 근데 임바 인자 가도 이내 거 뇌딩에 차대도 다고 다 가져 가라 주고 다 당마티. 강가 속인데 다 녀모디 가서데 임바자 다들 뭐 최전에 아니 거 가도 이내다 지금 사나 전화 통나 가도 이나다 크게 nga 당보 인상 그 뒤에 너무 깨시그래 근데 임바 인상 너무 막게베 안타까지 저기 가서되다 저 가서 그 뒤에 가서데 너무 막게베 탑라다 대시가 심해다다 깨치고 싶지도 봐 깨치고 싶어서 그 뒤에 내들 그거 맞아 봤지 아니 깨사와이나 강교지 들 그거 뭐 맞아 봤지 강교지 아니 너무 뒤 생활도 못 왔지 what get to bring but what did it
So to really recognize too that mental affliction is something that is kind of always harmful, that whenever it arises, it creates harm. And normally in an external kind of worldly sense, we can have a benefit can arise for us, harm arises for us, on occasion, whatever the situation is, if the conditions are met, then this occurs. But when mental affliction is in the mix, it can only be harm. It's always harmful. And so we have to bear this in mind. There's no sort of like out clause in mental afflictions. And so that this is always the case, and sort of like, when it has already arisen, we know that unless we are able to do something quickly about it, that is going to create difficulty. Even when it's kind of like, we're out to help a friend, but if we're acting out of mental affliction, we know that only going to bring naturally harm to that situation. So it's kind of like positive and negative are there, but when mental affliction is in the mix, it can only be a negative. And so this is something that we must recognize, and that we must recognize that it can happen at any time. It can happen whenever, because we are simply beginners, that mental affliction is possible at any moment. And so therefore we have to employ the qualities of mindfulness and alertness to alert us to the possibility of mental affliction, to not allow it to arise. First of all, if it does get its kind of foot in the door, we are on top of it straight away, and that we act as quickly as we possibly can to stamp it out. That's this has to be something like our dedicated kind of practice, never to give it an opportunity.
다 개치시대 쇼가 야랑만 꿀로 야고 쩌네 꿀로 야고 쩌네 다 이제 니만 랭겐데 다 심제 탐제도 산제 고마 토베 그 토바쇼 토베 체도는 간투도 배주지기스 다 근데 이바다 디 개게 다 녀모 지그래 녀그래 녀모 다 같이 괜찮아 거주네 개치로 요바도 소소 워터바체 아니 거기 제시 바유 등에 순네바께 와이네 네벨는 게 페바투비 상 네바께 와네 페바투비 삼상我的这个三罗大爷，我的真的，他感觉这个虽说说通话音呢，虽说说这个建国话音呢，按这个他肯定是中华音呢，按这个他说了，他说了这个说了六百几万呢，说了偏多万呢，肯定这万音呢，但他们这了这个说的，他这个偏多万就是说。是吧？说了六百几个人买呢，说了偏多个人买的，说了根据这个人买呢，所以买呢也，所以买呢呀，他说得到了偏多百个呢，他说就是就说偏多百见都就说，我在这真的，他这个偏不当呢，这个偏不当讲，我的感觉说这个就告诉了，港土的卫生局呢偏多都不说，给的那个马些毛病我给得了六百人呢，六百的偏不就是就说。但你拿了蒙巴药的，你马西边我给，你偏头个药整个药的，偏头就差不多那做法的，真的用死个的，给的六百呢，六百的偏偏就了就说，偏偏讲了就说，我这偏不当的。
But this begins in the morning. This is important, that when we actually set our motivation in the morning, we set it as powerfully as we possibly can. And that means that we remind ourselves that we are on the process, the path to benefit all sentient beings. I must do the best I can. And in that context, the main job I have is there's no way I can give opportunity to mental affliction today. I must be really very sensitively aware to the conditions that might give rise to my mental afflictions, recognize them, and not allow them any opportunity. If anyone harms me in any way, may I return benefit to them. That whoever I meet, whether a situation is harmful or beneficial, may it be beneficial. May it always turn out to be beneficial for them. If they should criticize me and so on, it doesn't matter. I give them benefit in reply in return. If through my own ignorance and not knowing I harm somebody, without intending to, may it turn out to be something of great benefit to them. And so this is the kind of like only the sharp point of your motivation is to not allow any mental affliction to have any word at all in your day, but also to keep the mind filled with benefit to others.
我的那真大感觉他是蒙古个团的，他就古龙觉当的，安尼这个三路当的，给这些当的，他蒙古个团的，他这个所说的这牛毛毛给完了白准钱的， 다 개디 님의 지 가서도 소소 몽배 온게 지 가서로 다 셔라 내 봤는데 지 주바 임바 있나야 아니 된데 그다 몽배 온게 된데 제 봤더니 용시 그래 소소 팬도 요 삼삼 전에 다 가사 감다 매번 나서와 임바 있어 들려 내 좋아데 들려 용시 그래 다 용시 온도 된데 내 봤대 내 봤, 정말 여봐 얘는 내 봤대 아니 가사 들라 아니 저 팬배 튕겨도 좋아쇼 팬배 튕겨도 좋아쇼 로아 디글라 잡아데 니제 게야당 레니바세 데데 레니바세 조에 데데 튕겨도 좋아쇼 스파 셈 딩네 식사 많이 셈 딩네 방원이 어디랬잖아 아니 갈리 잖아 다 반자 너무 숙초도 충도 줘 아니 항도도 되게 셈제스데 개침못스네 짜침못스네 아니 딜러 구바다 제와당 아니 저 잡아데 니제 범해야 어디 간자 망체데 다 계산다 심지어 되는 연구를 왔다 소소가 저기 랭 온게 가셔라 창바개로 가셔라 세단 개연구를 다 용도 창당 로직 개연구도 와 왔다 당분에 걸어 구급소를 마트는 파치 구론죄 직지대 아니 그 삼로나 되지 여사도 아니 그 심지어 되다 제일 파도 대화 용에 갑라장 너무 개발내 숙심못 마개다 간에 개발 정보로 낭매 많이 받잖아 어디를 제대다 탑시 강연의 제대 개체부터 안 학도도 랑결을 너무 이어봐도 못 쳐봤잖아 딱 깬다 태워도 너무 깨그래 상상잖아 못 쳐봤잖아 아니 안 당번에 섬게 편받다잖아 너무 막게라 다 삼다 개체부터 봐
So we need to take a very comprehensive approach to this the whole job of overcoming mental afflictions, reducing the impact of mental afflictions that involve our motivation, that involve our thinking processes, that should be involved in our discussions with others, that at all times we are aware of not allowing any inkling of mental affliction to arise in our awareness, and that if we do harm others, and of course this is very possible because of the fact that we are so kind of blatantly beginners, and because of our ignorance, that we are very kind of aware of that, very sensitive to that. If any harm has occurred due to whatever I've said or done, may it become a condition for benefiting them. May it be a condition for benefiting them in the sense that they might eradicate some negative karma that they have, or indeed reflect on cultivating love and compassion from their own side. Whatever it is, may it be beneficial to them. And that we make these kinds of thoughts and aspirations deep down. You know, we must avoid acting kind of like paying lip service to the teachings, just you saying it just because it sounds good, but deep down, we are very sincere in what we're doing. And that means that we are aware also of the degree to which our actions are imbued with either attachment on the one hand or aversion on the others. And so we are very careful with our connections with all others as well, that we do not have we try to kind of have our interactions without any involvement of attachment and aversion, and we don't act mindlessly. You know, we're kind of like careful, we are aware, we are employing mindfulness and alertness in all of our body, speech, and mind.
我的那个送的用的多，我到的那些讲俺那个刚突突的，上了当对吧？呢，到我的那些用过的吧，我的。
Therefore, it's this is kind of our practice. Whenever, in whatever situation we find ourselves in, our practice of love, compassion, the mind of enlightenment should be to the fore, and that whoever we meet, whatever sentient being we are in the presence of, that there is no hint of mental affliction from our side at all, but only a benefit which is imbued with loving kindness, compassion, and the mind of enlightenment. And so I say, we when we act like that, we're able to make that part and parcel of our everyday lives. And then at one time we will find ourselves on our deathbed, just at the very end of our lives, and we can really honestly say, I did my best. I really tried to develop positive qualities and to completely overcome the negative qualities. And so I can die with certain delight, with a certain kind of sense of fulfillment. As the great Kadampa Geshes used to say in relation to their own death, that I can die without any regret because I was able to really practice the teachings on loving kindness and compassion. I didn't leave it just as words, paying lip service to the teachings, but actually I really try to embody those qualities. Therefore, when I die, absolutely no regrets.
아니 내게 잡아다 닌자스게데 아니 직장을 샤메 셈 딩내냐면 잡아있어 땅아 시바이는 교바 매송.
And Ken was saying this is Geshe Chengawa, who said on his deathbed that I didn't just leave the teachings on loving kindness and compassion at just mere words, but actually from the depths of my heart I attempted to practice them. Therefore, absolutely no regrets now when I go. So we have to see that we have an opportunity to emulate the great Geshe Chengawa. The next outline is that we will never bow down or come under the control of the mental afflictions. So this is the vow of really making the effort so that we never fall under the sway of mental affliction. Verse number 44. It would be better for me to be burned, to have my head cut off and to be killed, rather than ever bowing down to those ever-present disturbing conceptions.
마잖아 다 탑면도 데려서 녀몽게 아마게 고급 소토와이나 다 랑문에 개와듯이 녀몽 판바샤 랑 개와 차대도 와다 데데 임바 인자 다디 모처베다 다 녀몽을 고급 되게 매서 와다 모처는 다니 친제 다 데리네 친제 다다네 친제 다 저기 가서도 다 이제 녀몽을 개다 소소로 녀바들의 용어도 메스 다 배는 저기 동네 청아 중화의 인데 다 소소가 배 가서는 lu mela tawa me sekde sekwa me sekde ane sekwa jwa ta so so sedi so choba che cheba da daga ne singe dele cheba ina jodam da ne chöngi da ji gobo cha da chönja gi de cha da so so gobo cheba ina ya wo da ga je gede jwa ina da nyong gi xiang do ma do che de ge chu do su go che ja wo da la yes da dige de dang do len shana 녀몽의 상황도 뭐 녀몽을 당도 말하지 되게 당도 나샤와이나 안다 거서도 가자 다 강에 지게 타 주는 거 좋아. 뒤에서 장보시나 레라를 샤스. 레라를 샤스 거서 레라를 샤스 가서는 무투네 동에들의 모양을 지금 제투고 도와는 라이스. 대니 체대 동에 잠을 샤면도 무투네 동에 영어를 레면도스. 당어도 당도 말아제나 딜라 때는 녀모를 고급지 잡아지나 다 무투네 동에 주주고 도스. 된다 체대 동에 잠을 무투네 동에 영어를 레면도 뒤에 이바지다 뒤 담가 모노와 지고 도스다. 담당 모노와 지고 도스. 그래서 뒤다 남바고도 다 지금 뒤주 근데 뒤다 남바 근데 지나 다 지금 남바고도 다 근데 고도 이마 있네요. 다 미대바 타다 이런다 다 저제 세다리 뭐냐 세 나만나라 이네 마음발에 무투네 다 동에 용역이 타다 가서다 가서다 남바 고도 있네 다 지금 미도바 타다 계제게 다 가서 자유 소고데 녀몽베 잡고딜라 뒤바 미자고스타 잡고딜라 아니 뒤바딜라 구급되네 되네 다디 가서다 다디 상황도 좋네 다딜라 이제 가서다 라바디 년전 줘야돼 지금에서 온도 마당 와서 온도 당와 지금에서 미자고 셔봐 와서 와단지 미자고
So this verse is really saying to recognize the true enemy here, and that is the mental affliction. To recognize that this is always the case, that the mental affliction is always the enemy, and that no matter what my situation, no matter what kind of situation I find myself in, I will never give an opportunity to mental afflictions to take control. And so it's kind of like, talking about these ways of dying. It's better for me to be burned, to have my head cut off and to be killed. And that somebody, with a weapon does that is kind of like, sounds drastic, but in the context, it's really only kind of the suffering of one life. It's quickly over. But then when you compare that to the enemy of the mental afflictions, which has constantly caused dissatisfaction down to drastic suffering for me without beginning, without end. It's like constantly in that state. And that we have to make the unmistaken choice here. And so it's saying, this enemy of the mental afflictions has caused suffering for me, untold suffering in this life and all previous lives. And so therefore, it's kind of like the suffering, any suffering that I could undergo just in this one life pales in comparison. And so therefore I make it clear that I will never bow down to the enemy of the mental affliction.
아니 강에 당도래는 요모로 고가 맞대야다. 아니 다가니 제가 가서를 근데 지금 전화다 지금 대과 챔비 출근 냠내 지금 제바는 아니 지금 가서를 지금 그 란다며 타이바 막게 심제 탐제겠다. 내가 내 님발에 때려줘 내 님에 저거 탐제 얘기 고쳐봐쇼 삼사제 고쳐봐 삼사제 어떻게잖아요. 이 가서를 딱 이제 지금 가서를 지금 가서 잡아대 니제 다는 소리 냠내 저 어떻게 된게 아니 통계를 배주다네. 되게 너무 깨나 마게나 배나 된게 저 배나 자제 자탐바 다 지금 소설 레사사네 아니 되게 저 가서 강에테 저 배나 소설을 배나 데트 센텐스로 가르치고 있는 강에테 다 쳐서만 너무 깨봐 이나 아니 데트 센터 마요한테 개요 말마 다디 중앙에 당돌라네 아니 마주 나게 타다니면 심지 탐색을 내게 받이 다다 녀들 고쳐봐쇼 섭사들 너무 깨두고 요 말이 아니 된게 동에 태바디 잠 이제 자주 샘게다 잠바데 이제 깨게네 줄어줘야 텐데 다 저되기도 와 다디 멤버자 너무 깨봐이나 디 강에도 마태바 개차기요 말이야 마태바 마차 갈라 무튼에 강에 용해게 아니 규칙 당돌래는 저되기도 와 그러고 당가리 규칙 두발에 너무 규칙발에 다른 동네데 책이요 단데 무튼에 동네 규칙 좀 저되기도 오래다 지금 남주지 배주 당도나 디 당돌래네 아니 녀몽 그거 맞대봐나 뒤캡상 차래도.
So it's very important that when problems arise or suffering arises for us, that we practice that really accepting the issues and accepting the issue, the problems and the suffering without allowing any opportunity for mental affliction. This is important in general, but it's particularly important in the context of us being on the Mahayana path and trying to aspire to the mind of enlightenment motivation, that we should see it as an opportunity for enhancing our practice of loving kindness and compassion by taking on the sufferings for the benefit. That may this be take on all the sufferings of all the sentient beings. I take it on now, that it will be a benefit to them not to have to experience the negative karma. I take it on in the context of this particular suffering now. And so it's very important to see any suffering not just as something to accept, but actually as an opportunity to take it onto the path ourselves. And so that's very, very important. It's like one has a death sentence, but if you have the mind of enlightenment to the fore in your thinking, the benefit of all sentient beings, this is something that isn't going to make a difference to that motivation. There will be no opportunity during this execution for me to allow the mental afflictions to override anything, because I am totally dedicated to using this opportunity to increase my loving kindness and compassion. And mental affliction, can arise when there is a problem, but also mental affliction can arise even when there's no problem. And so it's all it does in that case is just guarantee problems into the future, suffering into the future. And so you can see that there's no suitable occasion when a mental affliction should be the right choice.
and Geshe the drawing sarwa say Mabishung. And it's several the Masay Yetela and Geshe ngab Molon capture chis. Sonchen. And tell it is a lama to Maju to it to Maluta, the mother, Togota, the Bachingulos, Lama Chubet, Sonchen, and Composo Sigua. Tell it is a lama to the Chisolama, that jingle lava, Maju to one and get Tata never sent that Tata Yakala Mimba shows. And the data Majuna get on your symptom, the other Deba Juche, and the data to get the Yapa Tata Mimba show, to get the watch of a shows. What the Molom de Gunnet, Lamachavana, you take the Sunjan, and then I got the medical self symptom. What a kaja Yomong, who got members of Chavata. Java the Niji can dress pair to do. Yomo, when is it Yomo Gag, who got Shibuju or the Yena Tigal, who got Madan and Jamba the Niji Kene? What is it? Castle. 다 가져래 님보들 내 돌아다 다 녀모 개발하고 내가 다 줘네 개요 말이야 다 줘야 매가 모두는 동네 용에 규정에 두고도 와 왔다 나다도 다 된줄 냠내다 투말도 와 어때
So that there is the story that sometimes bring about when discussing the graduated path teachings that refers to the kind of incidents that occurred on a regular basis during the Cultural Revolution, where the greatest of the kind of like the best of the great masters of Tibet and so on were often just summarily executed. And in this particular case, that one particular Geshe was targeted and hauled out in front of everybody and went through this struggling session where everybody was obliged to criticize the Geshe prior to his being then killed and executed. And just before he requested that he would make a prayer And the prayer he chose was that the verse from the Guru Puja, which reads something like, "Oh, precious Guru, please bless me, so that all the negativities, all sentient beings may ripen upon me now, and that all my happiness and virtue I dedicate to all others." And these were the last words he said before he was shot. And so it's kind of like really amazing example of practice of really really understanding the teachings and putting them into practice, because regardless of how you go about trying to deal with a situation like that, if you allow the mental afflictions to take control, you're only guaranteeing not just the suffering of them, but the suffering that continues on into the future.
다 되네 인상 알아서 저 가서 당과 만호와 제 담에 만호와 제도 개침벌도 조생 만호와 제 조생 너나 차도 만호와 제도 개다 만호와 제바이나 미지 닝고시 렌토고도 그뒤에 레고가도 시부지 강에 제바 가로 이바이네 닝고도 렌토고도 시부지 디기 조에 가로 이바이네 닝고도 렌토고도 그뒤에 아니 저 최초에 튕겨를 배주 땅도 바이나 닝고 렌토와 성차버다.
So it really comes down to making the unmistaken choice every time, that's taking the essence of precious human life all the time, and that's always available to us. It's regardless of whether suffering is arising or happiness is arising. There's always that choice for us. Can we take the essence? Can we make the right choice? And so to use the situation to enhance our spiritual practice.
근데 이마자 지금 다긴 라바다 쇼가 꾸노 쥐에다 아니 무튼의 양세 꾸노 쥐네 아니 지금 디기 중앙에다 등의 중앙에 만나 다 가켜봐면도 디 중앙에 가라니 최주에 튕겨를 배주 땅도 봐 지금 삼 그뒤에 아니 지금 대세가 송전에 아니 편바땅 양 대세가 송 편바땅 대세가 송 근데 제가 있나 아니 가서 지게 결라 봐서는 내절리 랑신게 용되거라 강에 잡아내 랑신게 최 삼로 코드에 디기 중앙에 랑신게 최를 삼로 코드에 준 거로 와다 밤에 전 대바나 튕제 그때 약고 여반에 최주 두고 말아 봐 그러봐 딱 이제 밤에 전에 마대한테 전바대 세신게 쓰는 거뒤에 구급심이 전에 딱 지금 탐제 개발 토외된 얘기 미유 조인 심제 탐제 산제 고마 주외된 얘기 미유 조인 근데 이마다 디 교대 거두이네 국업 요래 동네 중앙이네 국업 요래 디기 중앙이네 국업 요래 디 국업도 거두이네 게 렌토와 지금 삼삼 전에 아니 고 렘바이나 렌 아니 편바땅 점바데 세신의 심바체 들레처럼 아니 거두이네 국업도 용되게 용되도 아니 국업도 말라바 전에 렌토가 있나 아니 문에 전에 데네 데도 줘야 대화네 대화도 줘야 다가네 미지기 님불 렌토야라다 딱 가두이네 아니 고급들 라그 말봐 고급들 라그 말해 셰 최신의 평가 말해 켜바이네 평가 말해 현재 가서 연애 평가 말해 거기서 고급 렌토고 말해 현재 고급 여바데 소소 하고 받잖아 동네 전에 고급 열에 디기 전에 고급 열에 디니니까 고급디 여바데 못쳐베터네 아니 샘게 편바 땅잖아 그들 렌토바 지금 삼사잖아 아니 가두이네 고급들 중앙에 가면 렌토고 봐
So like I pointed out, that this motivation that we set in the morning to not only to set it as strongly, as sincerely as possible, but to also build into that motivation the awareness to check on that motivation throughout the day and to bring it up again, to remind ourselves of what our motivation is. And so that we're in a situation where we are able to see happiness and suffering and see no difference between them, because both are automatically giving me an opportunity to engage in spiritual practice. And so it's kind of like that. We have to try to make that automatic through our cultivation of mindfulness and alertness. That mindfulness and alertness is bringing my attention to the fact that whatever this is, whether it's a moment of suffering or a moment of happiness, that it is kind of a moment actually for me to engage in spiritual practice, to refine my loving kindness, compassion. And so it's something we try to gain, so it's second nature to us, that it's kind of an automatic response that we have. This is so important and so, you know, we can see that if we lack this kind of conscientiousness, it automatically gives an opening to mental affliction to arise, and it will get in if we are lack an awareness. And so it's kind of very important that this process, this motivation, is kind of reminding ourselves of each moment being an opportunity for practice is the antidote to the prevalence of mental affliction in our day. And so it's kind of important that we see it like this. And so and also to see that regardless of our conditions, regardless of our situation, that this opportunity is always there. We just have to take the opportunity and make that right choice. And so we have the opportunity for suffering, the opportunity for happiness. It's always there. And so we kind of like we want to be able to not lose the opportunity, but to see the opportunity and see the opportunity for taking the essence of our precious human life, for moving from happiness to happiness in our lives, and to be always kind of understand that the opportunity is always there. It's only up to us to be able to take that opportunity.
Super baby, the Rota Nomo de Bezun Chavaina, Bebe Pangvaina, Pong Nuba, Pong Nuba, Nudo Draw Gomala Sum Jen, Draw Gomala Sum. Reta, Nomo Sig the Range, that Casora, that Manjaj Range, that Dunga Tamji Jungsagi, that Manjaj, Gu Chatigotua. That the Pangna, so that Maban Sharan, Tagarema, the Pangvaina, Bezun Chavaina, Pong Nuba. Nuba imba water de uneta kao ko sojwa uneta negita jinde toa kombala sumja toa komba so ranju yu nyomo zawan ne chuna denebe demeba sata demeba ane gyuchi da nyomo di gyuchinji lo da den yong yu do chinji lo le juwe inza zoba demba ina pong nuba ane zawan ne chuna denebe denka ya meba ta zawan ne ko nyomo zawan de ne ba ko de nesa ta shide she meba indu and Casodata, never then kind of matching, and a body by ourselves, what I can just what the listen or the listen, so or subject some condition.
So the next set of outlines dealing with the fact that if we put the effort in and we are able to abandon mental affliction, then we are aware that like we have that capacity to overcome this intractable enemy, to overcome the mental afflictions, and that should bring joy to the mind. You know, it's kind of like important that we bring this to bear, this kind of facet of the practice, because you know we can see that if we have recognized that mental afflictions are the source of all suffering, and then I can actually abandon or overcome, get rid of the mental afflictions, and surely that is worth rejoicing in. And this has again 3 subheadings attached to it. The first is saying, if we manage to uproot the mental afflictions from our continuum, then they will have no place to abide. The second is that because they arise from a mistaken premise, then it's possible with effort to abandon them, to overcome them. And thirdly, once they are once they are uprooted, they will have absolutely nowhere to abide, nowhere left to stay. So therefore, it is correct to proceed in the kind of with the job of overcoming and abandoning the mental afflictions.
Well, let's contact it.
The first of these headings saying that once we are aware that we have the capacity to overcome the mental afflictions, if we put the effort in, and then that is the source of real joy. So the verse number 45, the common enemies, when expelled from one country, simply retire and settle down in another. Though when their strength is recovered, then they return. But the way of this enemy, my disturbing conceptions, is not similar in this respect.
이단 녀몽 자데 배 가서라 담가 철라는 철라봐도 녀바 지금 저러 타메 자데 철라는 철라봐도 녀바 지금 저 말에 때 이내야 타메 그 자데 소소 지금 내가 저 소소 개가 라바 이내 양 아니 어디 녀바도 맞자네 아니 데 유신 지를 다가 이제 죄치만에 가르쳐 진짜 야 편에 거라 그 또버지게 녀바한테 약속 합대 자 좀 되기도 와. 다 녀몽 자한테 근데 말이 쓰고요. 녀몽 자도 매번 소차도 양교고 용사게 요말. 근데 임자 타메그 잡고 렌지 유네 총야 야네 유 현다도스 내세다 유 현다들 내내 아니 유의 용수 손이야 되네 대야 니바리 때네 니바 때네 아니 또 깨네 되네 뇌렌제외 체도스 치도고스 뇌렌제외 체도 치도 또 니바 때는 용구도 다른 시기 야 배나 가서데 다 되는 용 되게 되는데 다 개갑이네 다가는 개갑 찍찍을 찍네 개갑 찍이요 쇼네 봐 지가서데 지기 다 되네 차사 쇼잖아요 간사서는 거야 녀바리 때는 야 수사되거든요 용 되게 가서냐 야 파주 가서는 야 셔마되는 로바제 찍제 튕게 자네 야 간사서는 야 고도 되는 용도 봐 고들 용 되게 요래 다 녀모 다 되는 봐서 녀모 자네 최대다 자와 많이 돼서 과다 다대다 자와 말이 자원의 충화이나 현도 내버 소지 오면보다 자원의 충화이만은 매버 소서는 양 셔마제는 내면 유바제 수용되는 게 요만고我的我大地因为啥的谷歌养不起来多的谷歌养不起来的或没把就说成了研究给没把因啥的谷歌养不起来大来讲把的过去吧说是多
So this verse is kind of on one hand pointing to the fact that the mental afflictions are that which cause us harm from life to life to life to life to life, whereas the enemy of this life can usually only harm us once, or for the course of this life. But here it's making another distinction, also saying that the enemy of this life, at least in times past, when they were kind of like lost the battle in the field, they had to withdraw and were expelled from their particular country, but they might just stay in another country, licking their wounds, and then reestablish their power and support and come back for revenge at a later date. We're saying the mental afflictions are not similar in this way, because if you get rid of the mental afflictions from the root, they don't have the capacity to come back. And that therefore we see this therefore that's a good opportunity. That's a weakness of the mental affliction. So when we see something like this, we should see it as something that invigorates us and inspires us to get rid of the mental afflictions.
녀몽거 자디 녀도 좋아요 말이야. 타메 자디야 소소그 지금 탑 개바 될라 페바지 좀 될라 페바 거에 값지로 소소 페바지 좀 도와이나 대년 그 조차에 도와. 다 녀몽 자를 뒤요 말이야. 다 되네 이마에서 코빵 거에 콜라 갑자기 짜 거에도 차되게 도와. 짜 거에도 차되게 도와. 코 갑자기 저 말을 매번 마소고 봐도 그 무튼에 내 되게 도와. 다 타메 그 자디야 소소가 지금 문에 전에 들라 코로나 강에 제발 가도록 소소 문에 전에 샘되는 편바도록 봐 약보 제발이나 약보 있는 거 조차대 용되기도 보다 들이 쳐봐도 어디래.
Another difference between your worldly enemy and the enemy of mental affliction is that the status or situation of the worldly enemy is not always the case. If relations kind of like improve between us, that there's benefit going back and forth, that such an enemy can be a friend, indeed, can become your greatest friend. So that is possible, but that is not possible when you talk about the enemy of the mental afflictions. That the only attitude that is kind of suitable towards the mental affliction is that we are opposing mental affliction. We want to overcome mental affliction, because if we allow mental afflictions to if we don't do that, our mental afflictions will stay continuously and will not go.
니바 아사 가서 주치지로 이바다 너무가 자와데 단지 머리가 차대요라 단지 머리가 차대요라 다데 주치지 말로 주치지 로가 이바이자 치지 로가를 주에 주에서 좀 바때바이나 본도 그랬어 자war래 뇨모 셔라 미기방 다이 레세 강도 좋아죠 강도 내내 다는 자치로 로션달 아사 로션달 좀바 never sex.
The second of the subheadings is that because the mental afflictions arise based on a mistaken perception, that they, with effort, it is possible to overcome them. Verse number 46 says, deluded, disturbing conceptions, when forsaken by the eye of wisdom and dispelled from my mind, where will you go? Where will you dwell in order to be able to injure me again? But weak-minded, I have been reduced to making no effort.
여번 진짜는 용의유대 치질로도 중앙인바 인상 그 셰랍기 제바지기는 어떻게 줘봐 셰랍기 제바지는 어떻게 아니 거기 유군에 전에 민두 와서는 녀반년에다 저 앞에는 녀몽기 자와까지 단지 머리바디 머리바 그럴로래 그런 요래 이내 그게 신유대 대 유대는 두바 랑완도 두바지 지기 아니 나와도 셰네 아니 들라 차다가 로게네 다 용되게 열봐 다 되서 라운드 줍도 제바제는 못해요 인자 아니 거기 가서데 못해요 인자 아니 디 로디 가투 열다 가투 열 로디 제수 마다 소도요 되서 녀몽게 자와데 돈이도베 셰라지 미기 배드다 배준지는 빵바이나 다게 일에서 셀네 다 소소로 디게 텔레 파셀네 다두바데 파셀네 강도 좋아져서 다 가바쪽도 제바제 그때 때 강도 내네 니바데 다 가바제 내 니바데 두고도 내 요바래 니바 니에데서 달라서 달라 니바치 자베 칠봉와 미시스 달라 소소로 니바제 칠 봉한테 시그마레스 돈 두고 봐서 그 가서 다도 좀 로다가라는 지금 로디 신유 다도 마주바데 못트네 아니 딜라다가 디 된다 아니 가서 퇴종의 셔랍게 삼종의 셔랍 검종의 셔랍게 어디 내마도 받잖아 내마도 칠 온한테 미시도 왜냐 다 가리켜래 레바이나 아니 랑게 로시네 데데게 누바 딱지 데데게 못트에 데데게 귀소 가르리샤 제발 가야 지금요 말 도나 가야 지금요 말 내가 그 동네 대화세에 동네 주위에 데데게 탑시 데데 지금 파제되면 동 시부랑기 동네 귀자와 가르리샤 배주 지금요 말 And today is a more to matter when you lost shame, but Dala, the dig to Dala Dona Machina, Nega Koran, Nega Samatan dating in Dala, Lenji, someone name. Debe, Zuma Yomaris, never save and never Java, you know. The name was that, Dilateneta, call a Google to your, call a Google and Mutu never chatted yours, Java in a show.
So here, talking about the mental afflictions, after all, are a mind state. They are kind of a mental element, mental state. And so that they are mistaken with regard to their object. And so that wisdom is able to see this through analysis, to see that and recognize that this is completely the way it is, that wisdom becomes convinced of this, gains conviction, and can understand and to be able to uproot this mistake by dealing with the ignorance grasping at the true existence of a self-entity. And so in saying that that is also, mistaken attitude, that the root mistaken attitude of being mistaken with regard to its object, the way it appears. And so once the wisdom is able to see this, the eye of wisdom sees this, then it can make put a stop to that by cultivating the wisdom arising from learning, wisdom arising from contemplation, wisdom arising from meditation, and to see that such a situation, this mistaken situation, is completely untenable. Nothing can exist objectively inherently. And so it overcomes that with the wisdom realizing emptiness. And so this is the case with regard to mental afflictions. That here the very root of the mental afflictions in the mind stream is the mistaken understanding. And once this is seen, saying with the eye of wisdom, so that I can develop the wisdom realizing emptiness, that means that these mental afflictions will be expelled from my mind. And then where will they go? Where will they go in order to be able to harm me? It's impossible for them to be anywhere. They're completely eradicated. However, it's my problem because it's true to my own weak-mindedness. I haven't really done enough to eradicate the mental affliction from my mind state. And from time to time, I put in a bit of effort to deal with some suffering and so on, and to kind of go after happiness in another way. But by and large, I've just given opportunity to the mental afflictions to become ever more a feature of my mind state. And so this is my problem. And so because of that, I've been reduced to not making enough effort.
지금 미패쳐와 아니 지금 대두기 제 요견의 가리 인바이네 롭전 요견에서 패쳐와 지금 아니 거지 제바 망고 제거한테 제바 제서 망체 지금 아니 제 지단 내다 돌아 지유갈 제바 제네 지네 아니 디거디 주자 거제 내기도 거제 데데 갈 제바 지네 당문에잖아 동네 가르레샤 동네 유 가르레샤 아니 디파바가 데데 제바 지근데 다 라바 제면도 지 가서래다 지금 문에 그 저거 이 쪼들라 구조 태도에 제바지 제투고 요마르와 제투고 요마르 아니 델라 때네다 저기 대화 주변에다 동네세게 뭐유데 내주 투바지 용투고 요마르와 용투고 요마르 와다라 다 근데 이메자 다 다다디 갑절라 투지 첨보데 데마 아니 나라서도 투게 나라서도 람라 나라서도 달 고마서바 상게바 콩기 다 동네세게 동네 주고 레모도 다 스틸라 유에 동네스가 제가 두다스. 디가라 차바 두제가 동네스가 제가 두다스. 차바 두제가 동네 되게 안에 동네다 유에 동네니까 땡지가 두와스. 안에 디 가바는 연구도서 디 안에 가서래다 너무 독숨을 때는 디 가발 때는 연구도서나 다 간자 지금 가서래 때데 동네 용해야 돼. 깨와 될라 때는 연구도다스. 로아다 동네가 아니 깨와데 되게 동네다 깨외 동다 동네가 다 가와다 나와다 치외 동네가 가르다 깨와들 연구도 다스 깨와데 가와 연구도서 실레스바스가 쓰였다 받을 연구도 다스 디간에 연구서 레사바들 연구도 다스 let the Gadesa or took some Sagi to task. A took some culture also, and because of the character you go so that, a do something, and Tazi Marikwa telling you go to task. That can't Tazi Marikwa never saw Matu tea, never saw to Casati, Lord Chinji Lodge Resha, Korani, two much Reshas. That can't team never maso with Bato. Want to never Chagum do task. She would be Casora, Takanja, Kong she would generate. Right way you can Mason good one. That the nigga soon, the day soon Shabatilla, Takaja soon Shabatilla, and the jigger Pentitana with Rebecca Telapani. The day in that the Rebecca Telapop. And the Drubel on to Chamberlain Yamso Lang, the top bucket. What at the nigga any put up was shoot or that Latona, Munaja, no shoot or that. No shoot or that Munaja, what that. Sanjay but Jumse, because a Yamungo on a mason. So at the and a pentita to the Sanjay Gila and because of the Takaja to just tie about you and they come to Mabala to buy just soon go to Yang because of near the Tangdo Yawachene. Then they chewa chicken in pentita to somebody bet Telapop. Then bet somebody bet Telapop 20 and nature by Yamle, but you Yamle chicken so Yamle, Topaki to kick with all the letter Topaki tos. Topaki to what I can start the turn, more ten, that is young to what you was to what the beg Yamyon to an soon. And Yamyon to an soon, I did Tombalaya, Genda, not so much you do, young Casset, Tanto Cassin, you do have a way, nor in that you do. Till you do, and the Penditas will regret somebody bet Telapo. Tell up by Nedun, Dini, Nebetun, Dini, and to be able to Yamleba Suge, and Yamzolan, Topaki to kill me, Topamajata Rea Marva, Topaki to the Topaki to here. What the legend oh, that Matua bit that was she was to what? That the day you were the Tarang, another of Google the Junda, she would give us somebody to what.
So, we see in the world today that most of our kind of intellectual ability is centered on just focused on, external objects. There is not enough inner contemplation by a long shot. And that also that, there's this understanding of suffering and happiness is hardly even a subject worth study. That is a very coarse understanding of suffering, a very coarse understanding of the causes, very coarse understanding of the causes of happiness. And so this this is so much in contrast to the Buddha's own life, who for our sake developed that mind of enlightenment, for our sake trained on the path, for our sake attained the mind, the state of enlightenment, who elucidated for us the kind of subtleties of suffering, not just the suffering of suffering, but going on to the suffering of change, and then pervasive suffering, which actually induces the other two sufferings as well. And so really elucidated the three poisonous minds, the root of those, the grasping at the true existence of a self, and how that ignorance needed to be uprooted. We start with the idea of just being born into this world, but the very fact of being born means that we're guaranteed old age, sickness, and death. And these death is at that point we're propelled by craving, grasping, and existence into a new life. Karma dictates what happens. That karma itself is comes from the three poisonous minds, the actions motivated by craving, grasping, and ignorance. And at the very heart of it, the very root of it, is this grasping at the self entity. And so until we understand this is a mistaken mind, until we uproot this ignorance, we know we can't ever get freedom from suffering. And so this is something that we have to take into account. On the other side, we have like the way that the kind of Buddhist teachings have evolved First of all, they were kind of disseminated by the Buddha himself. Then they were taken in hand by the great pandits who, through their own valid reasoning, were able to collate all the teachings to distinguish between those that were interpretative and those that were definitive. And furthermore, then the practitioners who became aware of these teachings and kind of took them on to see if through practicing them they could reach realization. And if it wasn't possible, then that was it. That the teachings weren't good enough. But the fact of the matter was that these great practitioners have generated direct realizations based on these teachings. And so this is the proof that the teachings are valid. And that proof has come down right down to us now still. And now we are handed the torch. We are given the opportunity. Can we prove the absolute validity of these teachings?
21st century mind advanced Buddhism 3,500, 600 century later. More advanced. So
yes, it's a sobering thought to think that when the 21st century is billed as the century for mind advancement. When we look at 2,500 years ago, in the person of the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings, that the mind was a great deal more advanced at that time than it is now.
What did it? Because mix again, Chikune Tunga Jukune Karimi, Deve Jungune Karimi, and Dawa Tubeke, and the Lam Kaso de Chasawa, Manoa, Korim Machowa. You are the Kaso. The Kanja Kaso that Captain Megan Jorbata, Munetane, Putabo. But the Lana members to our that then you were the Marado than the Tarukuk Chia, the Pekawas and Potato.
And so, the very fact that we have such profound, in-depth analysis of what are the causes of suffering, what are the causes and not the causes of happiness, we have this amazing, profound, and peerless path that is complete, that is unmistaken, that is all set out in the right order. I mean, it's on a plate for us, and that we see this. We should see this as just an incredible opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And there's Shashaka.
So let's leave it there for today.
Yeah. That one doing the 가서 탑텔라 투지셔부터 도바 샤제 도바 아니 셋업 돼야돼 아니 남주 내신잖아 안들 미과시 좀 아니 되네 다 간제 저 랑게 지워들라 다 간제 저 가서래 가서도 년중의 섬지에 삼로다 감송 코 가바께 와 있네 아니 동네들한테 때네 다 간제 다기 쉬버지 동네 교 잡아 두제고 동네를 맞대와 차대고 되네 이번에서 왔다 잡아 두제고 동네 빠마도 와나 아니 대화 천이 상황이 용해 매대버지 what that is some of them calling about when you don't hear some of that then anything about a lot in it and rangi jewel pematama jabach so some such then the kanjake simje tamjake to sanje kumar to be say ngati kama to sechu and money but the kachaka something simsha then they and jig kachaka something give a lot in it 아니 지금 랑게 집어라 니메기 뭐 주소 삼사자 다른 심제 담제도 산제 고바 마도나 타번도 타번지 삼사 로지게 듬바지게 된데그 듬바데 아니 랑게 집어라 다웨기 뭐 가서 냐강와 주소 삼사자 되네 반대자라 라마는 뭐지 다게 지워 빼면지 그런데 좀더 구조 투정으로 자도서 들었는데 제발라 되네 아니 가서대 다까지 두개 가서대 라마샤자 생겼대 아니 여기 남바잖아 랑게 집어라 당도 가서 저 니베 가서 수면 때도 산제 고마마도 받을 제수 소수 선서체 아니 되네 그래서 다 야고시 중수서 가고 안 되네 야라도만 매내자 집어 그네 그거들지
So as normal then in the dissolution we bring our focus to the figure in front and we start to contemplate on the topic of renunciation to consider the three realms of existence, all of psychic existence actually being in the nature of suffering, And we have both the three types of suffering: the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, but most especially pervasive suffering, that which guarantees our stay in cyclic existence. And that's and the fact that we must gain kind of a definite sense of emergence from this veil of suffering. And this brings the notion of renunciation to bear. And from that thinking arises the lotus mandala seat at our own crown. And then myself, I, is the one seeking to gain that liberation. I look into that, the status of that I, that self, and find that it lacks any objective existence, that is merely imputed by thought, and we pause on that mere negation of the object of negation to give rise to the sun disk mandala seat on our crown. And then the self I is the same, wishing to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, giving rise to the mind of enlightenment, from which arises in turn the moon disk mandala seat. And so we then ushered the invocation verse to the Buddha to come to that seat, to take his place on our crown. We say this verse thrice. At the end of the first recitation, "O glorious and precious root Guru, come take your lotus and moon seat placed here on my crown. Keep me safe in your kindness, bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind." The figure moves from the space in front towards our crown. At the end of the second time, comes to be seated on our crown. At the end of the third, we have the certainty that the Buddha will remain with us until we ourselves attain the state of enlightenment. This is something that brings a certain joy to the mind. We automatically, spontaneously make the offerings of the 7-limbed prayer and the mandala offering.
가서 왔다 되긴 해 삼았다는 즉 가서도 가서를 다 가져 예중도 삼로스다 아니 예중때 라는 디페마다 제제 교수 삼사체 되들로테 아니 되네 지나고 쭉 가져 지어봐 있네 다가니 라고도 아니 산제 고마 두비스 나드 파츠 많이 받다가가 셈샤 어디 아니 가자 가삼 대대지 로치게 대대 예별 로다가라 라는 가서 빼마다 맞게 때도 아니 님의 지고 교수 선제 탐내 선제 고만 요원이 마다 토바 마도 지금 토바 지기 삼자기 로직게 아니 다른 지금 가서냐 교수 받에 저를 너무 무슨 다게 님가 빼면 되지로 가지고 고소도 우리서 들었는데 저번 답을 값소 패 아니 님의 값소 줘 수백 값소 때도 쉬는 선제 고만 마도 받도 제수 송수 손을 가고.
So then, if we have time, we do here the descending nectar light meditation. Likewise, now we start to concentrate on our own heart center, preparing a suitable seat for the Buddha to come there. And again, we contemplate on renunciation to give rise to the lotus seat mandala, and then the idea that no kind of outer inner phenomena exists objectively, that everything is merely imputed by thought, just focusing on that lack of the negation of the object of negation to give rise to the sun disk mandala seat. And this self, wishing to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, the mind of enlightenment contemplation, producing the moon disk mandala seat. And then again, O glorious and precious Guru, come take the lotus and moon seat placed here on my heart, keep me safe in your kindness, bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. At the end of the first recitation, the figure moves from our crown and down through a central channel. At the end of the second, arrives at the seat, pre-prepared seat. At the end of the third, we have that same certainty that we remain until we attain the state of enlightenment. That there is a kind of a sense of rejoicing in that fact.
아니 되네 뼈마다 담아져도 마인드 가면 숨전 남준이 내다는 엔디가들 도지가 생각을 지금 같이 아니 되네 다 같이 또 매창아 다에도 뭐는 마음에서 다에도 뭐는 되네 생각 좀 숨을 것 같아 가지고 공부시 아니 되네 지지 잡아야 거 순간 알아봐서나 디디디디디디디디디 basum koyo bas tene ane tebe wadele kaso tede nga o yeda ma hedo taw ma o ma yeda ma hedo taw ma do ma shama ne so tene nga de basum koyo bas ane rangi ningi yuso lama tuya ko shubati ane kuso to le wese to rangi chibone kandi ga pala wese to de rangi lugi na ta ja wese ge number 2 chene ane Toma mevansa dibada dibachida kyabaduya ani chikasora takaja sojuba majimala misanjuba junjama tsuzunga je nasa nyosa lotala soba takaja sodaga tomada kawa jaju seba lavada kawa sangage damseda kawa pada mala maguba kiboda lobela maguba toa samba soba jama kujosula nebe lejiba so dona torida tabe gyosu jiba kawa da yosungu so chichiba kandi jiba ino jangshi dama jungsu samsa wadine kongokye.
So then the petals of the lotus fold over and are joined at the tip by a white 5-pronged vajra, surrounded then in a clockwise direction by the name mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha, in an anti-clockwise direction by the mantra of Manjushri, and in a clockwise direction again by the mantra of dependent origination. And so then the light rays emanate from the Buddha within, permeating through the lotus petals, through every atom of our own bodies, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, and purifying all the negativities and obscurations that we've accumulated since the beginning of time, including all of the 10 non-virtues of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, of harsh speech, divisive speech, lying, and idle gossip, covetousness, malicious intent, and wrong view. All of the infractions of Pratimoksha vows, the Bodhisattva vows, or the Tantric vows, all shows, all instances of disrespect towards our parents, right up to our own guru, all naturally occurring faults and negativities, as well as all those proscribed by the Buddha. And all issues relating to our own ill health, body and mind, etc. And so we see that all these are completely and utterly purified.
다간제 어디를 좀 아니 하도도 다 뉴도 산제 고바 도발라 타메게 나시 께 치치 임바자 타메게 나시 께 탐제 다네 장네 아니 다간제 다바람 잡아시 차도 장고 중수 서서 어디를 고바샤 아니 내가 소소 시도 잡에 셈데 닐 롱디 닐랭 있잖아 라마샤자스가 고데 현지 지금 전에 소소 류데 라마샤자스가 고를 주수 섭체 소소 신도 잡에 셈데 닐랭자 라마샤자스가 투데 현지 지금 전에 아니 소소 셈데 라마샤자스가 투라 주수 섭체 아니 소소 류가 예수다 라마샤자스가 구송도 오 예매 주수 섭체 디 동바제 동바디 예배 로디 대화제 대화디 동바제 대돈 있으면 이시 계속 섭섭제 아니 랑 내사게 내대 내가 교연 탐제 장네 라마 샤자스게 다비시 주수 그래서 어떻게 보셔
As well as that, of course, we have the issues related to any thoughts occurring through our own self-cherishing, self-grasping attitudes, the imbalances in our elements, in our channels, winds and drops, and particularly the main obstacle to our quickly being able to progress towards enlightenment. This ordinary view is transformed into pure view for us. Again, with our own more subtle wind acting as the substantial cause, together with the wind, the body of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own body is transformed into the enlightened body of the Buddha. And through the combination of my own more subtle wind acting as the substantial cause, together with the mind, as more subtle mind acting as the substantial cause, together with the mind of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own mind is transformed into the enlightened mind of the Buddha. And then I see my body, speech, and mind now as inseparable from my body, speech, and mind of a Buddha. And this brings forth a sense of the emptiness of the situation, which transforms into bliss, which transforms into emptiness, and I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and emptiness. The place that I am in also is transformed of all thought and is transformed into the enlightened abode of a Buddha, of an enlightened being.
Lama Shaja Singha Kusum to the Mo Yeme Juati, and Juatile, and the Casa Juate, Nala Rashi Mekachi Kobashi, and a day Tugale, and was a part of Mebata, subject subject under the Vesetual attendant, comes to the subject Tamjala Ponte, and Lama Shaja Singha the Kusum to the Mo Yeme Jusu, some such. Tadana Saga Net, the new John Tamjet and Lama Shaja Singha Davish to Jusu, some such. What the chan? That's subject Tamja Sandia Kumala cooking so the Nimateri go to Sona Kawako. And Tanishi subject Tamja Lama Shaja Singha Sala Koba. Teach the Suzu Kawa Kartuba. There to go so the Chabakanga and it to go so to Chabakanga and it Kasorata, Tomba Tomba gave a loti, there were gave a loti, Tombanya, Tedonisum, she kills Sasakumache.
And then seeing myself as this enlightened being lacking any inherent existence, but seeing myself as a fully enlightened being, I send from my heart center light rays equal in number to all the sentient beings in all realms of existence. Upon touching them, they spontaneously arise as fully enlightened beings. Likewise, the places that they are in are transformed of all thought and transformed into enlightened places, and that I can take kind of real pleasure in the fact that today is the day in which I have fulfilled my vow to lead all sentient beings to that state of enlightenment. That this process of leading all sentient beings, the virtue that has fueled that progress, that myself as the agent of that virtue, I know lack any objective existence whatsoever. That from that thought of emptiness arises bliss, it swings back into emptiness, and I abide again in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and emptiness.
But subject Tamjego to the Sanya command to be so what I'm to Kawakon, what the chat. That maybe you just some of the Canadian. The inner yard, Tanda D. Tanda D, that Trinity, some of Tamati, and the Kaja Juche, that Nudo, and Chicasa that the summoner, Munakora took to again, 20 get that Chawa Yohaya. Yohatan, how don't the Tata show and she and the Takanja, Sanjay Koma Torre, and a Jew so what and Jajuk said the Yanta Tawani in by Yusa, Tajik, Netan Kandish Chava in a Kibuchuneta, to Buchuneta, Netan Kandish Chava in a Ken Kandish Chumayiman, Teta Tamja, and a Nyanjuk, Nyanjuk, Jajuk, Yanta Tawaki, and Twin Kagan the Juru show, watch it, what did it?
So today is the day that I can say to lead all sentient beings to that state of enlightenment. I rejoice, but I also realize that I'm only acting on the level of imagination and aspiration here. How can it be that easy? But at the same time, I sincerely dedicate so that I can make this occur for real as quickly as possible, that all of the conducive conditions for doing so will arise, all of the inconducive conditions will be completely gone, and that in whatever the situation is, may I see it as a cause for being able to generate the mind of enlightenment, emptiness. That whatever the situation of happiness or suffering that arises, I draw no distinction, but I see it as an opportunity to cultivate renunciation, the mind of enlightenment, emptiness.
You are Avalokiteshvara, great treasure of compassion, not aimed at through existence, and Manjushri, master of flawless wisdom, as well as Vajrapani, destroyer of hordes of demons without exception, Sankapa, crown jewel of the sages of the land of snows, Gosangrakpa, at your feet, I make requests.